In today's video, we're going to be comparing the Sony a7 IV with the a7S III. Both of these are awesome little mirrorless cameras from Sony, and I've had the opportunity to work with both of them. I've owned the a7S III for the past 2 years or so and have been able to shoot documentaries overseas with it, weddings and commercials, as well as a range of other videos over the last 2 years. And the Sony a7 IV was one that I rented earlier this spring for a music video project and got to use it on that shoot. So I feel like I have a really good understanding of both of these cameras, what each of them offers, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I thought I would make this quick video to share my thoughts and help you decide which one is right for you and your next project. For those of you that are new around here, my name is Riley and I'm a documentary filmmaker that likes talking all things filmmaking and creativity. I'm also someone that likes to talk about gear and Sony cameras, so if any of that interests you, be sure to subscribe and follow along. All right, let's dive in. The first thing that everybody probably cares about is image quality. And there's several things that are going to impact this. You have dynamic range, you have resolution, and you have codecs. Now, when I rented the a7 IV to be the B camera on this music video project, I actually was super impressed with the image quality, and the a7 IV actually wound up being my A camera for the project. Now, that's because one, I wanted to be able to work with it more closely, and two, I also found that the oversampled resolution on the sensor actually made for a really pleasing and really clean looking image. The Sony a7 IV has a 7-ish K sensor that it will actually oversample into a 4K image. Now, this is going to help clean up a little bit of the noise. It's going to add a little bit of extra detail to that 4K image and just overall make it look really nice. Now, the dynamic range on these two cameras is actually very similar when you're filming in S-Log3. So I was actually super impressed with how closely these two cameras matched each other and how easy it was to color grade and get a close match. So I think if you're looking for these two cameras to work in tandem, I don't think you're gonna have any issues in regards to the image quality. Now, you also have to factor in the codecs and the fact that both of these cameras record in all of the same standard internal codecs is really nice. They're going to record in XAVC-S, XAVC-SI, and XAVC, I think it's HS, it's the H.265 codec. If you want more information on how the different codecs impact the image quality, well, I'll leave a link up here or down in the description to another video I made talking about it in more detail. But the fact that you can record in the same codecs with both of these cameras really makes them a really nice pair, and honestly makes it hard to decide between these two cameras depending on how you're going to use them. Now, how you use these cameras is going to bring me to the next thing I want to talk about, and that's the different strengths and weaknesses between the two cameras. Now, the most obvious one that you've probably heard of by now is the different recording frame rates. So both of these cameras record in 4K up to 60 frames per second, which is excellent, but the a7S III can do this without a crop. So you're gonna be able to record in full frame at 4K 60 frames per second, and you're actually even gonna be able to record in 4K up to 120 frames per second, which is really nice to be able to get that extra slow motion look that I think we all love seeing in our images. Now, the a7 IV can record 4K 60, but it does this by windowing and cropping in on the sensor. I think that this is both a heat issue because of the extra sensor resolution and just the fact that the a7 IV costs $1,000 less. Sony's protecting some of their higher end cameras by implementing this feature as well. So I think you really have to ask yourself what type of footage you're going to be recording. Do you shoot a lot of B-roll, and does that B-roll need to be in slow motion? Now, if that's the case, I think the a7S III is the clear winner here, and is definitely worth the extra $1,000 or so you're gonna have to invest in it. But if you don't record a ton of B-roll that needs to be in slow motion, and you're okay with, some of those compromises, then I think you might actually be okay with the a7 IV, especially if you shoot a lot more photos and this camera would be a true hybrid camera for you. The extra resolution on the a7 IV is going to be a significant strength. Now, the a7 IV actually has a couple of newer features that have not found its way into the a7S III. It has a crop mode in 4K, which allows you to punch in on the sensor and get a little bit of extra resolution while still recording in 4K. The a7S III can't do this because it doesn't have the extra resolution. The a7 IV also has some other nice features, like a focus breathing compensation mode, which is nice if you have certain Sony lenses. I didn't get to try this feature out when I was recording my music video because I shot the whole thing on a manual cinema lens, and so there's no electronic communication there. Didn't really get to try it out. I'm sure it would be great, especially on some of the lenses that breathe a lot more. Another drawback to the a7 IV is that it doesn't record in ProRes RAW. Now, depending on your workflow and your needs, this might not be a deal breaker for you at all, but for me, I've been shooting in ProRes RAW for the past couple of years on the a7S III and have really enjoyed the extra bit depth and the flexibility that the RAW workflow allows for me. And so if you are shooting on projects that you want that just little bit of extra flexibility, the little bit of extra control in post, then having a ProRes RAW option is definitely something that is really nice and is something that I feel like I've benefited from. Another drawback to the a7 IV is that because it has the extra resolution and it is in such a small mirrorless body, some people have complained about overheating issues. Now, I didn't have this issue when I used the camera, but I think that might be because I powered it off of an external V-mount battery and I didn't have an electronic lens. So the amount of heat that the camera was generating, especially from the fact that we were indoors, like kind of in a cool environment, meant that there wasn't a ton of heat generated. It was like a 4 or 5 hour shoot, but I think had I been outside in direct sunlight, I might have run into some overheating issues. So I think that's all something to keep in mind. If you shoot a lot of like weddings with long takes and direct sunlight, it's just something to be aware of. You definitely don't want to run into an overheating in the middle of a ceremony or event that you don't have another camera to be able to use. Overall, I would say that the a7 IV does not have very many other compromises when compared to the a7S III. If the slow motion frame rates, the RAW workflow option, and the overheating issues are not something that are a big compromise to you, then I definitely would not overthink it. I was super impressed with it when I used it, but there are a couple of other things to keep in mind, especially when you consider the body and the way that the camera are built. The a7S III has a couple of advantages, in my opinion, when it comes to just the overall build quality. Now, the screen resolution and the EVF resolution, I think, are a little bit higher on the a7S III, which is definitely nice. And I overall prefer the way that the top dial and some of the other buttons are laid out on the a7S III, but that's probably just me being comfortable with it and understanding the way the dial works a little bit more. The a7 IV is definitely well built. It has the same flip screen, and it doesn't feel cheap or plasticky at all. When I picked up the two cameras kind of side by side, it was hard to tell which one was which unless you looked closely at the little tiny label or the top dial on the top of the camera. So which of these two cameras should you look at investing in and either purchasing or renting for your next project? Well, I think it's going to come down to your needs and your workflow and kind of how these tools are going to fit in and help kind of fill that space in your workflow. If you're someone that leans more towards photography or kind of has more of a 50-50 split, then I would say absolutely go with the a7 IV. The extra resolution and the photography features that this camera offers you, I think is gonna be worth some of the sacrifices that you're gonna make on the video side of things, especially since the image quality between these two cameras is so close. But if you're someone like me and you lean almost exclusively towards the video end of the spectrum, then I would say, in my opinion, the a7S III is definitely worth the extra investment. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, I just got back from West Africa a few weeks ago and was shooting a documentary project, and I brought my a7S III to shoot the project on. And I can't imagine the types of headaches I would have run into had I had an a7 IV instead of an a7S III. And that's not to say that the image quality wouldn't have been excellent, but filming in direct sunlight in 95-degree plus days and trying to shoot a ton of slow motion B-roll in the heat, I think would have just been a nightmare. Not only would I not have had those frame rate options available to me, but had I been trying to battle an overheating issue on that project, it just would have been a real pain. And so I'm really glad that I made the extra investment in my a7S III to be able to just make sure that I could get those shots and not really have to worry about it on that particular project. Now, that's a pretty extreme example and is something that you might not have to worry about. And so depending on your needs and your workflow, I think you really have to ask the question whether the extra $1,000 is worth it. And for a lot of people, and maybe even most people, I would say it's actually not. And having that extra $1,000 available to you to either save or invest in some other area might actually go further than putting it into a different camera body. Be sure to let me know in the comments section below if you're someone that uses both of these cameras. I think that they're excellent tools that are going to serve a lot of people really well, but I would love to hear your perspective on the strengths and weaknesses between these two cameras. All right, that is going to do it for this one. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.